Thank you for joining us. We can get started. My name is Jay Huang. I am a senior associate at Scott Legal PC. Today, we're going to spend some time discussing E-2 visa requirements with a focus on risky cases, which primarily means cases where the investment amount is relatively low. So just a few things before we get started. Some of you may know that the firm was actually founded on an E-2 visa 10 years ago. The founder of the firm, Ian Scott, applied for an E-2 visa to come to the US to establish Scott Legal. The firm has successfully renewed its E-2 visa as well. So this gives us deep familiarity and expertise with E-2 visas. Scott Legal is a full-service immigration law firm, which means we can help with a wide variety of visas suited for various circumstances, but we do focus primarily on E-2 visas. We have processed hundreds of E-2 visas, and we process many E-2 visas that are higher risk, which tends to mean lower investment amounts. We have processed at consulates around the world, but our primary two consulates are Toronto and London. We will be continuing this webinar series. We are doing at least 2 webinars a month on different topics. And at the end of this webinar, we will be sending out a few resources to all participants. So first, we'll be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint that will be used in this webinar. Second, we will also send everyone a comprehensive guide to the E-2 visa that you can use as a reference. We'll also send you a link that you can follow to sign up for the upcoming additional webinars in the future, and also a link to this webinar as it will be recorded. This webinar will also be made available on YouTube, and we do encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we regularly upload a variety of immigration law related videos. Finally, we will also send you a link that you can follow to set up a consultation with one of our experienced attorneys should you wish to discuss your case further. As for today's panelists, we are lucky to have Ian Scott, who is the president and founder of the firm, who has a leading expertise on processing a wide variety of E-2 visa cases. Finally, for any questions that you may have, please do feel free to add them to the chat box or use the Q&A function, and we will try and get to all questions. So without further delay, I will hand it over to Ian.
Thank you very much, GA. It's great to be here. And as GA mentioned, I'm in the US on an E-2 visa, and the E-2 visa was obtained 12 years ago. So we have done 2 renewals, and it definitely is an E-2 success story as we have 10 full-time employees. And it also is an E-2 visa case where it falls under the category that we're going to talk about today, where the investment amount was low. And as a result of that, the case was a risky E-2 visa case. But we're going to get into more details of what constitutes that risk that I just mentioned. So first and foremost, before we start to get into the crux of the requirements, there's a threshold requirement, and that is that you are a national of a treaty country. So that means that you have a passport from the country. The country of birth is not important. It's that you have a passport from the treaty country. There are around 80 or so treaty countries around the world, and they are in each continent except for Antarctica. And there are a number of treaty countries in Africa. There are a number of treaty countries in Asia, Europe, in North America as well, and South America. So definitely lots of choices. The world's 2 most populous countries, unfortunately, are not on the list. India and China are not E-2 treaty countries, but certainly a lot to choose from. So then when we're looking at the requirements, and we're looking at the requirements in the context of if you're an E-2 investor, but also if you're going to utilize an entity as an E-2 entity and maybe utilize it for bringing employees to the United States, the entity has to be at least 50% owned by nationals of the treaty countries. Often the question comes up of whether it's 50 or 51% that's required, but the regulations are crystal clear that 50% is sufficient. And typically the types of cases, and in particular the ones we're talking about today, you see an individual that owns perhaps even 100% of the company, but the requirement is that that person owns at least 50% of the company. So then once that requirement has been met, we're going to look at investment, and the individual, we're going to talk about this a bit more in some subsequent slides, but the individual is required to spend all of the money that is required to get this particular business up and running. So if you take my example, an E-2 visa, I started an E-2 visa company for a law firm, and before I went to the consulate or submitted my application, the consular officer really was expecting me to have spent everything that was required to get the business up and running. So whether it's spend money on the website, spend money on lease, equipment, really anything that was required to get the business up and running. And with that, you are required to actually spend the money. It's a question that we often get from people, the question of, well, do I have to spend it before I go to the consulate, or can I just take the money and put it in a business bank account, and then once I'm approved, let the government know what I plan on spending the money on? Well, unfortunately, the answer is that you do have to spend it before you actually get to the consulate. And this does create some anxiety for a number of people. The funds do have to be what the government calls at risk. In terms of the other kind of requirement for the investment is that it has to be what's considered substantial. And the government doesn't set out a specific amount for what they call substantial, but instead set out some general criteria. And as I said, we're going to talk about those a little bit more in some subsequent slides. The money that you invest can come from any source, as long as it's a legitimate source. The money can be from a gift. It can come from your personal savings. It can be, if you have property that you've sold, a house or other property that you've sold. It can be a loan as well. It can be an unsecured loan. It can even be a secured loan, as long as the security is your personal property. But definitely lots of options in terms of where the money can come from. And then depending on the type of business, as I said, you have to spend all the money that's required to get the business up and running, but we've listed some typical types of expenditures that come up. But really, depending on the type of what you spend the money on is really going to depend on the on the type of business. So if you're buying a restaurant, for example, then that's going to be very different from if you're starting a service-oriented business. And the way that E2s work is that you can either start a business or you can purchase a business. So either of those work for E2. And when you're purchasing a business, sometimes what you see, because to answer that or to talk a little bit more about that question of, well, do you have to spend the money before you actually apply? So yeah, you have to, if you're buying a restaurant for $200,000 or $300,000, you actually have to spend the money before you apply. Now, there is kind of a carve out here and an exception where you are able to, instead of transferring, if in the situation where you are purchasing a business, instead of transferring the money to the seller, you can put the funds in escrow, and then you can have a separate escrow agreement that in essence says that if the visa is approved, then the money is going to go to the seller, and if the visa is denied, then it's going to go back to the buyer, right? So, and that can be the only condition. The only condition can be the approval of the E-2 visa. So we often, when people are purchasing a business, we often do utilize escrow agreements to their favor. So the other requirement for E-2 visas has to do with employees. The term marginal is a legal term that's used in the regulations, but really what it's getting at is hiring U.S. workers. So again, just like the substantial investment amount, there is no specific number of employees that are you're required to hire. But generally speaking, we say that if someone's submitting an application for an E-2 visa where the E-2 visa is a startup, you want to be able to show that the business is going to be able to hire at least the equivalent of 3 full-time workers over a period of time. Like usually we use 5 years as an example of that period of time. And then, we talked about this. I talked about this a little earlier. The business has to be kind of real and operating. And I said in the context of, spending all of the money that's required to get the business up and running. But that implies and means that the business really should be very close to being operational. So, you have a website, you have a bank account, you have the entity set up, you purchase the equipment. All of that is ready. We had one case where the individual when she went to her consular interview, she was doing an E-2 for a gym. And when she went to her consular interview, the examiner asked her, if I went into the gym right now, it was in Arizona, if I went into the gym right now, what would I see? And she said, the equipment's been purchased, the space has been leased, they're just waiting for me to open the doors, waiting for me to have the E-2 visa. And that's really what the officer was interested in hearing, and he granted her the visa. The individual, you're coming to the U.S. to develop and direct the operations. Usually we show your experience here, but the regulations are actually getting a little bit more, that you own 50% of the company if you are a direct, if you are an investor. And then the other and last requirement that we're going to talk about on this page is that you do have the intent to return to your home country upon expiration of the E-2. And usually that's something that you can just prove with an attestation. You can just prove that normally with just including a signed letter in your E-2 visa application indicating that that is what your plan is. Now, there are some instances where, like, if you have an immigrant petition filed on your behalf, or some other instances where you may be required to add more evidence than just that letter. But generally speaking, the overwhelming majority of the E-2 visas that we prepare, that letter is sufficient. So some of this we've gone over, gone over already. Different options with respect to E-2 visa, and we at the beginning we also went over the countries that were eligible, or a large number of the countries, or where they were situated in the countries. Now, one thing I think that's a very interesting topic to talk about with respect to E-2 visas is how long they're valid for, how long they're issued for. And this is really going to depend on a number of different factors. So one factor that it's going to depend on is which country you're from. So if you're from, there's a table, it's called a reciprocity table. And this is a table that the government develops and says, okay, well, for by country, visas, and each visa can be issued up to this period of time. So there's an E in that long list of visas and validity periods. There is an E period. So if you look at a country like the United Kingdom, it can be issued, the E-2 visa can be issued for 5 years. Canada can be issued for 5 years. But if you go to Australia, it can be issued for 4 years. And then some countries, like Bangladesh and Egypt, it's only 3 months. Now, when we think of the visa, though, the visa is an entry document only, right? So even in the situation where a visa is issued only for 3 months, what that means is that the individual can come to the United States, and then regardless of the length of the term on your visa, whether it's 5 years or a 3-month visa, you are only admitted to you're admitted to the United States for 2 years. So only admitted would be used if you had a 5-year visa, and then admitted for 2 years if you had a 3-month visa. And that allows you to stay and live and work in the United States for the 2-year period. And then if you had a 5-year visa, for example, you would have to leave at least for, you could leave and return the same day to kind of reset that 2-year period. If you had a 3-month visa, then you'd actually be required to go back to the consulate and renew that visa, because again, think of a visa as just an entry document. The other thing that determines the validity period of the visa is sometimes when a visa can be issued for 5 years, for example, the consular officer will issue it for less time because they don't think the case is as strong as they would like. And so maybe the person's a national from Germany and they could get the visa issued for 5 years, but the U.S. consulate in Frankfurt might say that, okay, well, instead of issuing it for 5 years, we're going to issue it for 2 years or 3 years. And then that forces the individual to return to the consulate after a period of time and show the consulate that a shorter period of time, and show the consulate that they actually were able to hire U.S. workers. So now let's look at this substantial investment amount requirement. Again, as I said earlier, there's no minimum amount. And so there are a few factors we're going to look at with respect to how much it is you have to invest. So the type of business is going to be really important. If the type of business doesn't require a significant investment, like a service-oriented business, like the law firm that I'd mentioned, then you may be able to invest less. Now, unfortunately, even though we all know that maybe you could spend $5,000 and then start a law firm platform or service-oriented business, you are going to really have to invest a lot more than that if you want an E-2 visa. We generally recommend that people invest $50 or more $1,000. When I say invest, spend. So not just putting the money in a business bank account, that they actually spend. And sometimes the challenge with respect to some of these service-oriented businesses is finding things to spend money on. But unfortunately, it is really something that you do have to focus on. When I obtained my E-2 visa, I signed a 1-year irrevocable lease. It was $1,700 a month, and I paid a few months in advance so that I could increase my investment amount. And it really was a lease that I didn't need. I didn't have any clients at the time and really didn't need that lease. But at the end of the day, it did help me get the E-2 visa. The other thing that is going to kind of impact how much it is that you spend. Oh, sorry, another example of a different type of business. So for example, if you wanted to buy or if you want to start a car dealership, all right, so like selling used or new cars, then that type of business is going to cost a lot more to get up and running, right? Because you have to buy inventory, which is the cars. So the investment amount could be $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. There's a proportionality test that's used, and if the amount is under 100, 200,000, the government's really expecting you to spend even more than that. The government's really expecting you to spend 100% of the money to get the business up and running. But if you go higher, 500,000, maybe $1 million, then there could be some type of sliding scale where you're investing 70, 80%, and that still may constitute, being substantial. The other kind of point I always ask people to consider when they're asking about investment amount is, we don't like to focus just on a specific number. It's often better to look at the case holistically and look at, well, okay, I spent X number of dollars, but what other factors are there that maybe make my case a strong case, right? Do I already have employees? Maybe that can make it a strong case. We had a case where it was a healthcare professional, and she had already a large number of insurance contracts from an insurance company, and it was very, very evident that this business was to be a very lucrative one and one that was going to be able to support lots of employees. So that's something to consider. Sometimes what we'll do as well is include in a file details, like sometimes if the investment amount is lower, sometimes we'll include details from articles that say that, hey, for this particular type of business, you could get it started with $10,000, and this person spent even more than that. And then sometimes we'll also include a CPA letter where the CPA might attest to the fact that this particular person has spent everything that's required to be spent for this particular type of business. And then if you're buying a business, you're really going to, the purchase price is normally going to be the investment amount, and assuming, of course, that purchase price is fair market value. So some of these we touched on in the last slide, when strategies to deal with low dollar amounts. So one is to focus on the other parts of the application that are positive, right? So employees are positive. It could be that the company already has profit. It could be they already have employees. It could be that you're able to show prospects. So you can show contracts with clients or even letters of intent, or you could be able to, maybe there's a local chamber of commerce who will write a letter to say that, they've looked at this business plan and they believe that the business is going to help the local economy. So that can be very, very helpful as well. And when you're starting a business, you always are going to have a strong business plan, even in the cases where you have a very low number of pages that could be submitted, because you're going to selectively pick pages from the business plan, like the executive summary and the personnel sheet and the income statement, to show that the business is very viable. And we have kind of two examples. They're a bit obvious, the two examples here that kind of just illustrate the differences between and we do example 2, we do get a lot of that I don't want to invest anymore. I spent 5,000, 6,000, that's enough. Just give me my visa. But it's it's a very, very risky strategy. We will still submit if clients don't want to spend any more money after we recommend that they do. We'll of course still submit the applications, but it's just it can be a risky strategy. And in particular, depending on the consulate that you're at, right? So there are certain consulates that might be a little bit more open to looking at a CPA letter or looking at the fact that you have employees and things like that. Certain, but then there are some consulates that really have just kind of notoriously not been very open to investments that are lower than $150,000 or $200,000. They're used to seeing there's some posts that process large numbers of E-2 visas. They're used to doing them for more multinational companies that are transferring a number of employees and things like that. So when they see a smaller company that's a service-oriented business that hasn't spent a lot of money, they're very reluctant to issue the E-2 visa. So here's a list of some common E-2 visa expenditures, and the things on here are pretty good ones. The only ones that I'd say that may not be as good, depending on, when I say good, things that a consular officer really would like to see. The ones that maybe aren't as strong, we still include them, but they're not as strong. Legal fees, if they're, especially if they're fees paid to your attorney for doing the E-2, we do include them, but they're not as good as, say, a lease or equipment or furniture or something like that. Training courses is another one where if it's a very, training course for finite, training or licensing or something like that, that might be included. I kind of say that, with me, I started a law firm and I spent over $200,000 to go to law school, and I certainly couldn't have included that in my E-2 visa expenditure amount, or not successfully included it anyway. And the other one to kind of be careful of is a car or vehicle, truck. Like that can be a good E-2 visa expenditure if the business is, needs a car. Even when you look at the IRS is very particular with respect to claiming expenditures for cars, because they're usually for personal use. So we do recommend, if you do get a car, brand it and or buy it in the name of the company. And then here's some bad, what we call bad, weak E-2 visa expenditures. We have sometimes people submit receipts, Chipotle, McDonald's, my dinner, and, travel to the United States to get things set up. And they're not. And then the other one is expenses paid to related parties. It's interesting sometimes what we see. But the government's not going to be too keen on, you paid your cousin or your brother or sister $5,000 to do your website, or your spouse to, that. So these are all expenditures that are not that great. So when we look at consulting businesses, and we talked a little bit about that with my business, even because the law firm is a consulting business. And the one of the things I think that the officer did like about my file was they liked my background. I had a business background. I was a CPA as well, and they probably thought I would do a good job running a business, right? So anything that you can look to point an officer, point out in your application that where an officer might feel that you have an advantage, you want to do that. And you really want to put yourself in his or her shoes. The officer is viewing many applications in one day. Usually if you get 10 minutes with an officer, that's a long time. Usually they're deciding in 5 minutes. So your application, and when you get to the interview, because the interview is very important, you do want to put your to be able to very succinctly highlight the key factors of your business. So I've already have employees, or let's say I've spent X number of dollars on all of these things, or my experience is X, and I'm going to be able to attract a lot of people. I have these expert I have these letters of intent from all these people who want to hire me. All of those can be useful. Sometimes you can prepay office space, like lease. And lease is not required for an E-2, but it's highly recommended. So we always recommend that you get a lease. It's a very, very good E-2 visa expenditure. And some of the other things, sometimes people can prepay marketing costs. They can buy more equipment than they maybe need at that particular point in time. So now, let's look at a couple of different areas where we talk about service-oriented businesses and the challenge of investment amount, et cetera, and even challenges with consulates that may not be that keen on service-oriented businesses. But real estate businesses that kind of center or focus around real estate can be problematic also. And not to say, like, we have done real estate E2s for all the, those four bullet, like real estate brokerage, management company, real estate renovation, construction, and house flipping. We've done all of them. E2 successfully done them for all. But the problem is that often when the application has a real estate focus, sometimes the government can feel or think that maybe the application is the business is one that is passive, right? So that's going to can be a problem. So we've had cases where we had this one gentleman who came to us and he applied at the U.S. consulate in Frankfurt, and he bought a house for $600,000 and went to the consulate and said, I spent $600,000 and I plan on doing a house flipping business now. Give me the E2. And they denied his application and said to him, no, that's not enough, because that's just a passive investment, where you're going to buy a house and you're going to flip it. And, that's something you don't even need a visa for. That's passive. So with house flipping, that can work, but it's often it's on a much larger scale. Like we have a client that has over 50 properties that, it is on a much larger scale. Definitely we have great success with renovation, like, companies. Often, sometimes people will start out with, I want to do a home flipping business, but then we say, well, maybe it can be positioned as a home renovation business, and then the investment is a lot smaller because we're focusing on maybe a trucks and tools and things like that. And we all have also done real estate brokerage firms. I think the issue with those have to do more with the licensing requirement, because many states require that maybe you were a broker before if you own the company. So there are kind of some unusual licensing things that happen. But definitely it is doable. It's just you have to work closely with an attorney that kind of knows what they're doing. Similarly, E2s for equity trading companies, we've done a lot of these as well. And the key here is, again, that sometimes the government can think that the business is somewhat passive, right? So you have to kind of get them over that, get them over that hurdle. I think the other thing is, if you're just managing your own money or managing your family's money or even your friend's money, then that can be problematic as well, because they're kind of thinking, again, it's like, what are you, a day trader, or are you actually running a business where you're going to hire U.S. workers? So, so the more you can kind of point to other people's money, that's going to be better. But then when you point to other people's money, then this is a very highly regulated industry. And in fact, we've done some hedge funds and other types of cases. And with those cases, a lot of the fees were actually legal fees, not our legal fees, but legal fees for the lawyers who had to make sure that the regulations were in place. So the next thing we're going to talk about is, why are E2 visas denied? Like, what is it? What happens? Our approval rate is probably around 98% for E2s. Like, past results don't predict future outcome, but that means 2% of the cases get denied. So why is that? So low investment amount is a big one. And this is sometimes hard to get over if you're from a region where because you can't just decide that you want to apply anywhere, right? You usually have to apply closer to where you live. And then if you apply closer to where you live and you happen to live by a consulate that is not that E2 friendly, then and wants higher investment amounts, then then if you don't have the money to invest more, then it's going to be a problem. One good thing about being denied with a low investment amount is you can always spend more, right? Like if you have it, right, you can always spend more and then reapply. So that's something to consider. The other reason is the nature of the business. So sometimes, a business that's a doctor's office or a restaurant is really easy for an officer to envision that this business is going to be successful. Whereas some businesses where maybe like the ones we talked about before, like real estate or equity, the officer might think that they're kind of more passive. Filing, location, venue. Unfortunately, not all consulates are created equal, even though the law is the same. Consulates will apply the law very, very, very differently. And there are some consulates in the world that are, we highly recommend not going to, just because the level of difficulty with respect to getting an E-2 visa approved. And they publish statistics on exactly how many E-2 visas are published by country. And you can see that there are some countries that are treaty countries that, regularly don't have many or any E-2 visas issued. So something to keep in mind. Another big one is if you are applying for an E-2 visa and you have a business in your home country that's exact same business that you're applying for the E-2 visa for, and you don't have any employees in your home country. So that ties into the next one as well, where if the government doesn't think your business is going to create US jobs, then that's going to be a problem. And adjudicating officer, like issues could stem from personality clashes between the applicant and the adjudicating officer, but also sometimes, unfortunately, the adjudicating officer doesn't know the law and will, shut the case down, even though the case is a very valid one. And then finally, that there are some people who just are, they actually don't meet the requirements at the time of filing. We have sometimes people who come to us and say, I was denied, and then we look at their case and then we realize that they had, huge seller financing issues or other issues associated with the case, even down to that they weren't from a treaty country. Like that's actually happened, where the lawyer processed the case for a client, not us, a different lawyer processed the case for a client that was not an E-2 treaty country anymore. It was one. Because the countries come on and off sometimes, like Ecuador and I think Paraguay were on lists before and they're not anymore, but they're listed, but there's explanatory note basically saying that new applicants can't apply. It's just the legacy ones that can. And I guess that the lawyer that this person used didn't pay enough attention to what was there. So adjudication trends, unfortunately, there's still some consulates that are suffering from delays. Like consulates around the world really slowed down, like consulates that were quite quick, like London was 30 days, and they're a lot better now. Like Canada was 15 days to 3 weeks, and they're a lot better now as well. But there were long delays with COVID, but then there's still some consulates around the world where the delays are quite long. I'd say that E-2 visa processing is consistent in the sense of the E-2 visas have relatively high approval rates. Even the government publishes the approval rates of E-2 visas, and they're over 80%. So that's what they publish, and that would include people who file and don't know what they're doing, or have a lawyer that doesn't know what they're doing. So it is a relatively high approval rate. Even the approval rate for EB-5 petitions is closer to 50%. So and often there you're just dealing with source of funds. So it is a relatively high. I think it's a type of petition that the government is trying to approve, but it is one of the more complicated petitions. The other kind of thing to think about is where you apply. So normally E-2 visas are processed at consulates, but there are some limited instances where filing while you're in the US makes sense. Sometimes if you're one of those countries where the visa is issued for a short period of time, or USCIS sometimes has USCIS is willing to accept really low investment amounts. Like you can invest like $15,000 or maybe even less and still have a successful USCIS E-2 filing. But the problem is, if one day you do have to go to a consulate, the first time you leave the United States, that E-2 filing is useless, and you have to refile the E-2 visa. And even if you have an approved USCIS filing, the consular officer is not necessarily going to think that the amount that you spent is sufficient. A couple of things that come up with E2s, do you have to hire employees before? The answer is no. Overwhelming number of applications that we do are for startups, and there's no requirement to have employees. If you have employees at the date of application, it certainly is helpful for your case, but there's no requirement. One of the downsides of the USCIS filing is that the source of funds is going to be quite an exercise. The government is really quite, requires quite extensive analysis of the source of funds when you are doing USCIS filing. So that's something to keep in mind. We talked about gifts and loans that are permitted. And we talked about the ownership percentage being 50, so you could have two people, and they could both be be nationals from different countries even. So you could have one person getting an E2 as an investor from Australia, and one person getting an E2 as an investor from Japan, and then that's going to be fine for the purposes of E2. You can have two investors. The other thing to keep in mind that comes up with E2 visas is, if you go into a consulate and say, I want an E2 and I'm running a restaurant, and then, 6 months later you decide, well, restaurant business, I don't really take a fancy to it anymore, and I want to change it to a consulting business. You can't just change midstream. Let's say your visa was issued for 5 years. You can't just change midstream. If there is a substantive change in your E2 business after filing, or if the ownership percentage changes such that the 50% is an issue, then you do have to actually file something and get it approved before you can kind of just start. And then the final thing to keep in mind is you have to be really careful with family business purchases, because the government, we describe this as we go through consultations with people all the time, is that when you go to an interview, they ask you a number of questions, and it's not their first rodeo, right? It's not at all. So they that's what their job is, right? Is to get facts and find out. So when you go in and you purchase the business, so how did you find out about the business? Oh, it was my sister-in-law's business. So then that can sometimes spiral into a officer not believing that that there was actually a legitimate transaction that took place. So something to keep in mind. So if you are purchasing a business from a family member, it is a really good idea to get a formal valuation of the business done and show that you are taking funds from your personal account and paying the family member that amount. Because it's not prohibited, but you just want to make sure that there's no due process when it comes to going to a consulate, and then when an officer says no, it's not like you can sit there and debate with him or her. You have to leave once the officer says no, right? They close the window and then you have to go. So perfect. Well, that is all I had.
All right, thank you so much, Ian. Very informative information. So we just have 3 questions that came in, so maybe we can just go through them one by one. So the first question is regarding renewing the visa, and I believe this person is asking about the option to renew through USCIS. So basically extend the E2 status through USCIS. Would you like to explain a little bit about that?
Sure. So if you obtain the E2 at a consulate, and then you enter, and then let's say you're in the United States, and for whatever reason you don't want to leave to go back to a consulate, like that. This happened during COVID a lot, right? People were here and there wasn't an ability to go to a consulate. One of the things that you could do is you could file paperwork in the United States to extend your E2 status within the United States. So that's something that you could do. But keep in mind that if, let's say that your E2 status was ending and your visa was expiring, and then you extended your status, and then 6 months later you decided that you needed to travel or had to travel, then to re-enter the United States, you would have to go to a consulate and get the visa again. So, and that would be a renewal process or, reapplication process at a consulate. And consulates ignore USCIS filings. Like they're as if they didn't exist. In some ways, I feel that they can be more detrimental to for some reason, but yeah.
All right, so the next question we have is regarding payments to contractors. So what about payments that I give to foreign contractors? Does that count as investment?
Sure. I mean, it could. We definitely encourage people to spend as much of the money in the United States as possible. Now, if the foreign contractors were working on aspects of your US business, then yeah, we can include the amount, but as a general rule, we try to say to people not to include more than 20% of your expenditures on things that were, spent outside of the US.
All right. Another question regarding the ownership of an E2 entity. Can an E2 entity be 100% owned by one person? And how long does it take to finish a file?
Sure. Yeah. So an E2 entity can be owned by one person. That's not a problem, 100%. So we can complete a file within 15 days after you provide us with all of the information. And then we do have a 5-day option as well that we just charge a bit more for.
Perfect. A few more questions here. Purchase of a car. What about if I purchase a car used for an accounting firm? How can that qualify as an investment?
Well, I think that the car is one. It is a risky E2 visa expense for something like an accounting firm. I think, if you're purchasing a vehicle for a landscaping business or maid cleaning business, or one where the necessity for a car is not other than to just get you to and from work, right, your office. And as I think I mentioned during the webinar as well, that even the IRS is pretty picky with deductions when people have cars, right? Because they're basically saying that the majority of it is personal, so you have to have pretty specific evidence that the use of the car was for more than getting to and from your office, right, that you had. So it is possible, but I think that examiners can, especially if it's the single largest expenditure, I think it is possible, but examiners can question the actual need for the car. And we do recommend that if you do get a car, that it's branded, so it has like the name of the company on the car, and that it's kind of purchased under the name of the company, so it's actually in the name of, like, the deed or whatever that's called, not the title is actually in the name of the company.
Great points. Thank you, Ian. So just a couple other questions that just rolling in. So if somebody opening an IT business, what kind of expenses would be used for the investment? And do I need to have clients before I apply for the E2 visa?
Sure. So having clients, it would be beneficial because you'd be able to use the clients to show that you were able to, that you have prospects, right? And then what I'd say is the types of expenditures, if you just, if they just go back to the slide that dealt with kind of common E2 visa expenditures, I think that, that being said, there's definitely recognition that, that the person, that people who are starting service oriented businesses have to often spend money on things that they would not otherwise spend money on. Right, that's one thing. And then the other is that there's often a difficulty finding the things to spend money on, but it is required.
All right. So the last substantive question we have is regarding ownership. Can I purchase 51% of an entity and have 51% ownership of the E2 entity, and someone who is a US citizen can hold 48%? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. And yeah, that's fine. And then you're raising funds from property sale and loan for my wife's property. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. The money doesn't have to come from the treaty country. Because the last part of that question is just about where, I think that's what it's getting at, is
I
that
think so.
the money, if you, like, let's say you are a UK national and you got the money from India, from the sale of a property in India, that's no problem. The money doesn't actually have to come from the treaty country. It can come from the US, or it can come from any legitimate source. However, if the money does come from India, you do have to, from a property sale, you do have to provide details on that property sale in your, details on that property sale in your source of funds analysis.
All right. So regarding the consultation and the service fees, please do feel free to follow the link that will be sent after the webinar to set up a consultation with us. We will go through, we will ask you some questions and we'll discuss the eligibility for the E-2 visa. There's not necessarily what you need to prepare, but we can discuss your vision for the business and the source of funds and things like that. So definitely please feel free to go ahead and schedule something with us. The service fees, we will send you our retainer after the consultation. And in that retainer letter, you can review, and all of the fee information will be in that retainer letter. The last question regarding business purchase, potential business purchase, and regarding the investment amounts for the specific case, that kind of question definitely we can explore further on a detailed consultation where we can get more information about what type of business it is and exactly how much it will cost.
Yeah, because I think that if your franchise cost is relatively low, you would want to like spend more money on other things, right? Like you have money like you maybe spent on legal fees and other things to get the business up and running. Because that does, we deal with a lot of franchises, and $40,000 for a franchise is very low. One that's going to produce revenue and hire workers. That's
Right.
I don't know if I've seen one that low. So yeah.
All right. So thank you everybody for your active participation. This has been very informative. Thank you, Ian, for your expertise. If we don't have any other questions, we will close today. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Excellent. Thanks a lot, GA. Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.